Hi everyone, welcome back to our series on genuine being. We have covered sort of a lot of ground so far, I acknowledge, and some people may still be catching up on some of the videos, but we've gone through what is genuine being, that aspect of coming home to who we genuinely are and acting from a place of our own authentic self, which is ultimately no different than our own Buddha nature, Sanskrit being Tathagata Garbha. Some would say basic goodness, this sense of that we are basically inherently, innately whole, complete good as is. We don't need improving upon, we don't need to level up and become someone else. We can actually come home to all of who we are, and who we are is perfectly wonderful as is. And then we went into some of the obstacles, like the trap of doubt. We looked at how we can manifest a sense of genuine being in the times of great uncertainty. And then we said, okay, having looked at some of the obscurations and obstacles, how do we move beyond them into a sense of daring? Daring to be with our world as it is. And I want to augment that sense of like, okay, we've talked about this sense of genuine being. What do we do with it? How do we manifest it today? By covering a big chunk of what are known as the Mahayana teachings. Maha being greater, Yana being vehicle. So some of the later teachings of the Buddha himself, 2,600 years ago. And I want to apologize that there might be a few Sanskrit terms here today, but the first and foremost one is Bodhichitta. So Bodhi is open or awake, Chitta being heart-mind. Not a lot of distinction in the Tibetan Buddhist lexicon. Also another way of translating that would be attitude. So it's this open and awake heart-mind attitude, the sense of true tenderness. And you know what? It's actually not enough for me to just talk about it. Let's just do 1 minute of practice right off the bat. If you want to join me in a meditation posture that feels relaxed but uplifted to you, coming into feeling the body breathing. Relaxing into the present moment. And we can bring to mind the image of someone who we really love and care for. In particular, someone who might be going through a hard time right now. So maybe it's a family member who is ill, or a dear friend who's suffering financially. And when we bring their image to mind, we make it visceral. Almost like they're in the room with us. We think of the way that they smile, the way that they do their hair, the way that they dress. And as we bring their image to mind, we might notice that our heart naturally starts to soften toward them. We can contemplate the hardship that they're going through, the pain they might be feeling, and the heart grows more and more open. There's a sense of rawness and tenderness to it. A willingness to hold ourselves open to both their pain and our love of them. And if you'd like, you can make an aspiration for their well-being in your own words. May you be happy, or may you live with ease, or something else entirely, whatever feels right to you. You can take a deep breath. As you breathe out, we let the image of this person go. But as we emerge from this very short practice session, we might feel that sense of open-heartedness that I've been talking about. That's bodhicitta. So bodhicitta is inherent to who we are. Everyone has bodhicitta. As the Tibetan Buddhist teacher Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche once famously said, everyone loves something, even if it's only tortillas. Most of us love something more than tortillas, though. We might even the toughest of people. There's a character on the television show How I Met Your Mother. It's a sitcom that's been off the air for years, but this just came to mind. And he's a very tough lawyer. He's the lead counsel at this firm. His name is Artillery Arthur, because he's so mean to everyone he works with that he will just come into someone's office and just unload on them for no reason, for the slightest mistake, and just vomit anger and rage upon them. And the running gag is that Artillery Arthur, who's just known for this rage, loves his dog. There's a photo of the dog, and you say, oh, who's that? All of a sudden, he'll go from this total rage to, oh, this is my baby. Oh, you should see my baby. A sense of total softening. So even this almost cartoonish villain has this soft spot, this bodhicitta, and the way it manifests is love for a dog. So we might, for example, in our current climate, be very into villainizing a political candidate, saying they're just wrong, they're horrible, they're just heartless beings, but even they probably love their dog or their family. Even they have this bodhicitta. So we're looking at this soft spot that we all possess, this genuine heart that's so tender, and as I mentioned during the short practice session, raw, when we allow ourselves to be raw. As we talked about last time, when we dare to emerge from the cocoon of our own fears and insecurities, anxieties, we engage the world more wholeheartedly. And that's from this place of bodhicitta. So there's two ways that this might manifest in the world around us, in our own mind and heart. The first would be what's known as aspirational, and the second would be action. So aspirational bodhicitta. It means that we make the aspiration that we would be of benefit to others, that we could connect and offer them a sense of, for example, loving kindness or compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity. These core teachings of how love can manifest in immeasurable ways. So we might, in our own mind, just as we just did, bring to mind this person that we love and that we know they're suffering, and we make this aspiration, oh, I hope that you are happy, I hope that you're healthy or safe, or that you live with ease. That's aspirational bodhicitta. That coming out of our own open and awake heart, we're making the aspiration for their well-being. How would this then manifest? Well, then we're going about our day and we run into that person, and instead of being locked in our own stories about what's causing us stress or anxiety, or making an assumption about what's going on with them, we might find ourselves more open and awake to who they actually are in the moment, because we've been training the mind and the heart in this direction. So instead of sitting down and being locked into our own thing, we just sit down and we notice bodhicitta, our hearts start to open to this person. How are you doing? And we really mean it. And we actually hold space for them. All of a sudden, that aspiration for their well-being is transforming into action, where we're holding space for them or providing support, maybe advice. But all of a sudden, it's naturally starting to flow from the aspirations we've been making into action. Sometimes people want a checklist. Here's what I do to be a good, compassionate person in the world. Here's what I do to engage in what's known as the Mahayana path. So Maha, again, greater, Yana, vehicle. Why is this greater than some of the other foundational teachings? Because it's so based in compassion, and even in the teachings on emptiness, which we can get into later. But this sense of greatness, this great open, wide open heart, that's the emphasis here. That there's something so vast that we possess that can actually help those around us. So it's not a checklist. It's something that arises out of a connection to bodhicitta that begins to manifest as we make more and more aspirations for the well-being of others, not just the people we like, the people we don't know that we pass by in the street, the people we have a hard time with, like that difficult politician. The more we start to manifest bodhicitta in our own from the comfort of our own meditation seat, the more we then start to show up for others from that place of bodhicitta. But people do love a good checklist, and I will do that. Because the nice thing about these teachings from the Buddha is that there were ways that we could manifest this open and awake heart into forms of action. But the forms of action are actually known as transcendental actions. So let's unpack this. So 6 Paramita. Ita being shore, param being other. So the 6 other shores, what does that mean? There are actually 6 ways or actions that we can participate in that bring us to another shore. What is the other shore? It's the shore of enlightenment. So for people who have been tracking the daily, which comes with this particular online community, you'll know that I gave a very short example of this paramita, and I'll offer it here as well in case it's helpful. The other shore analogy is that we are here on one shore, and our shore isn't so great. The example I often like to give is that of Coney Island, because having lived in New York for so long, that was my go-to beach. I would go to Coney Island, and I love it to some extent, but it's also very dirty, and it's also, like there's glass everywhere, and sometimes you'll see like just garbage littered about and seagulls pecking on it. And then you find your like 6x4 square feet that you can put your blanket down on, and then someone next door, like right next to you, a few feet away, is blaring their music, and then someone on the other side is blaring their music, and it's just a cacophony of noise, and someone's being very loud with their kid, and their kid's screaming, and you're sitting there, and it's gotten very hot all of a sudden, and you realize you forgot to even bring an umbrella, and you get into the water. You're sort of like, I'm done with this, thank you, I'm just going to move into the water for a moment, and we start swimming. We look behind us and we feel repulsed by what we see. It just feels like, I don't want to be there anymore. I want to keep swimming. So we keep swimming out. And it's hard. There's waves coming. We're sort of going through them and doing our best to navigate the waters. And then we catch a little glimpse of something off the corner of our eye, and we start swimming towards it. And the more we swim, the more we realize, that's another shore that I can go to. So I want to visit that. That looks beautiful. It just calls to us. It's pristine. It's lovely. It's quiet. And we go and we do our best, and we finally arrive at the other shore. And it's wonderful. And it's, as I mentioned, it's just perfectly peaceful. This is the analogy around enlightenment. When we talk about the other shore, we're talking about enlightenment. Which, I realize when I start talking about enlightenment, people are like, well, this is no longer applicable to me, thank you. But why would it be? Maybe you've had a moment in your practice where you were able to just be with yourself as you are. Is that something other than enlightenment? I don't think so. You're able to be with reality as it is. That's enlightenment. When we talk about the Buddha attaining enlightenment, nirvana, he was able to wake up to reality as it was. So if we can do that, even for a glimpse, that means that we are then moving in the direction of this other shore. We catch that glimpse of the other shore out there, and we say, I want to go to that. I want more of that, and less of some of the things that are behind me on that Coney Island-like beach. Because that's basically the life we live in. We live in a life that is full of, sort of like discomfort is what I'm talking about with that. All the, like the music playing, the seagulls and the glass, it's discomfort. Because I don't want to be totally lost in the discomforts of samsara, the cycle of suffering that we find ourselves in. And discomfort can revolve around our own birth and aging and sickness and death. We've talked about the Four Noble Truths at the very top of this series. If you're curious, you can always revisit that meaning of the truth of suffering in that first video. But I don't think I have to go into too much depth here at this point. You probably understand what discomfort is. So we leave that behind and we say, okay, I'm going to go. And we swim through these waves. It's hard. It's hard for us to wake up. It's not an easy path. If it was an easy path, everyone would do it. But we continue to go through. And how do we move to the other shore? It's through the 6 paramitas, the 6 transcendental actions. And then finally we get to the other shore. And it's beautiful and it's pristine and it's peaceful. And that's enlightenment. And then we look over our shoulder and we see everyone over there and we say, if only they could enjoy this. And it's said that there are many great beings known as bodhisattvas, bodhi being open or awake, sattva being warrior or being, who look back from that other shore and say, I'm going to bring everyone else over here. I'm going to bring everyone else to enlightenment too. So they come back for us. So when we look at people like the 14th Dalai Lama, the 17th Karmapa, why are there so many of them? It's because they are these great bodhisattvas. It's said that the Dalai Lama is supposed to be the embodiment of this being of Avalokiteshvara who got enlightened and keeps coming back in the form of a Dalai Lama, lifetime after lifetime, to help us wake up and go to that other shore. So that's what I mean. We don't have to believe in multiple lifetimes to buy into this, though, because we already have that feeling of open and awake heart. We know that we want to be there for others. When we see other people suffering, we don't just shut down. We say, oh, I can be there for you. So we have the same heart of bodhicitta as someone like the Dalai Lama or the Karmapa or any of these great beings. We want to support others as they awaken. We want to not just be doing this whole thing for ourselves only. We want other people to suffer less too. So in that way, we are what it would be known as bodhisattvas in training. That we too, maybe we're not fully enlightened and coming back to help everyone, but we are basing our life and to some extent in the desire that other beings suffer less. That is something that's important to us. So if you are at that state where that feels important to you, that means you're a bodhisattva in training. That's no longer just about me. Sometimes when we start meditating, it is just about me, and that's fine. And if that's where you're at, that's also fine, for the record. That we say, okay, I just need to feel less stress. I need to not be so anxious all the time. And we work with our own minds. But then we go out into the world and we look around us and we say, oh my gosh, my neighbor looks anxious. We say, oh, I know how painful that can be. And our heart goes out to them naturally. Oh, my mother's stressed. I know that's stress. I feel it in my bones too. My heart goes out to her. Right? So there's some sense of all of a sudden, it's no longer just about us. Because as we practice and meditate, we gradually wear away all of the layers around our heart so that it starts to just flow. This love and connection flows more naturally, and we see the suffering of others and our heart goes out to them. That's what I mean. That's why when we become bodhisattvas in training, these beings who want to wake up not just for their own benefit, but for the benefit of everyone, and to bring everyone to a point of less suffering. I realize that I've covered a lot already, but I want to go just a little bit further into the Six Paramitas so you understand what they are. The 6 ways that as we navigate us leaving our complete, relaxing into discomfort, moving out into and toward enlightenment, toward awakening ourselves. What is it that we do? What are these 6 things? Years ago, I was leading a teacher training, and someone who was scheduled to give a talk on this topic came up with a beautiful, is it an acronym if it's the first letter? Yes, I think that's right. Which is, gosh darn puppies eating my peanuts. So if you ever forget what the 6 are, you can just remember this image of some gosh darn puppies eating my peanuts. Why the puppies are eating peanuts, I don't know, but it's effective. It worked for her, maybe it'll work for you. So let's go through them. Gosh would be G, and that's generosity. We all have a relationship to generosity to some extent. In the Tibetan tradition, it's said that if we feel very stingy, we start by passing something from our left hand to our right, and then we can build our capacity from there. Hopefully you don't need to start there. Hopefully you already have some sense of generosity. But generosity in the rest of the paramitas, it's like we are flexing a muscle. And we need to train that muscle. So we might think of ourselves as relatively generous people, but what would it mean to go a little bit beyond our comfort zone so that we can grow that muscle? In the same way that I might have used this analogy before, if I go to the gym, I lift a 20-pound weight for a long period of time, at some point the muscles just develop to do that. And then I can pick up a 25-pound weight, and all of a sudden it feels like a little bit of a stretch. It doesn't always feel comfortable to do it. But that's the point that the muscle tears and then gradually grows back stronger. Then I can continue. Once that feels super comfortable, then it's time to move on to a 30-pound weight, right? Same thing. If we want to keep growing our capacity for these paramitas, such as generosity, we need to go a little bit beyond the comfort level so that we actually start to grow. So if that means that we are, someone who gives generously to charity, maybe we give a little bit more than what we normally do and see how that feels. If we were the sort of person who, particularly in this pandemic, in this economy, we go out to eat in an outdoor restaurant and we leave a tip, maybe we go a little bit beyond what we would normally tip so that we feel like, oh, I'm being helpful to these people who might be struggling right now. Even if it feels a little bit like, can I do that? We don't want to obviously empty out our bank account and just become destitute so that we can be generous. That's not the point. The point is to go a little bit beyond our comfort zone and see if we can grow the capacity for the paramitas that way. So generosity is a good one for that. And there's a lot of opportunities for generosity for us to not give not just of our time, so not give just of our money, but our time, our energy, our support. Sometimes it means being the shoulder for someone to cry on. There's lots of ways that we can be generous. So looking at the ways that we can be generous and continue to expand in that direction. So gosh darn would be discipline. Discipline is sometimes considered a negative thing here in the West, where we are, like if you went to the principal's office when you were a kid, you were being disciplined, or your parents would discipline you if they found out that you did something wrong. Here, discipline is referring to the idea that we can discern what matters to us and follow through on it. So even as we meditate, we might have this active discernment come up where we say, I really ought to call my mother more. And then we acknowledge that thought, we come back to the breath. Oh, I'm such a bad kid, I should call her more. Acknowledge it, come back to the breath. I really ought to acknowledge it, come back to the breath. After the 50th or 100th time, hopefully we've been coming back to the breath all along, but we emerge from our meditation and we say, what I do really want to do is actually spend more time with my family. And that's just something we learned after the fact. It seems like that was a pretty strong pattern I didn't even notice was happening in my mind. Now that I've learned about it, what do I want to do? How do I want to apply myself? So there's a sense in discipline here of applying ourselves to the situation as is needed. We start to discern what is in line with our own moral and noble heart and follow through from that. So, I think there are lots of good checklists about moral and disciplined behavior in Buddhism. And if people are interested, we can get into more of that. But overall, the bottom line is that we act, as I say, from that place of bodhicitta, from that place of open and awake heart. So that when we are with someone, we might know, oh, the discipline here is just to be present with them. The discipline here is to help them with X, Y, and Z. That we start to be attentive is another way of thinking about this. Attentive to what is needed in the world around us. And we apply ourselves in that direction. It's very easy for us to all fall into laziness and say, well, I'm getting by and that's enough. So the discipline here is we'll get into exertion in a minute. The discipline here is to show up as fully and as possibly as we can for those around us. Gosh darn puppies. Puppies here is patience, which is one that I think we've all been asked to grapple with. I did a full video on this a while back in the online community. If you want to go back in time and look at that video, you're welcome to. But patience is, in the Buddhist tradition, not a grin and bear it sort of thing, where it's like, I'm just going to not snap at this person while I'm waiting in line for them to get done with their thing. I mean, that is patience, of course. Like, it's good for us not to do that, to have that sense of ability to just hold our seat. But really, patience is a sense of openness to however things will unfold. When this whole pandemic started, a number of meditation students asked me, like, what's going to happen? How long do you think this is going to take? Because it's always very easy to be patient if we know, oh, I only have to wait 2 months for this to be over, or I only have to wait 4 months for this to be over, whatever it is. Then we say, okay, I can pace myself. It's very hard because most of our life is spent in not knowing how things are going to go. It's very interesting because it's not like I'm a virologist or anything like that. Why would anyone ask me? So I kept saying, well, we don't know what's going to happen. Could we get used to not knowing? And that's patience. Can we apply ourselves to the ability to not know? To remain open to however things might manifest. If we are, my classic example is like, you're going to the movies. I guess no one's really going to the movies right now, but if you were going to the movies and your spouse is running late and they're getting ready, and instead of saying, oh my God, I'm going to miss the previews, unless we take this route by the car, and then if we can take that route and there's no traffic, then maybe we get through half the previews. That's not patience. Patience is sitting there and saying, okay, we might miss the previews, we might not miss the previews. I'm open to whatever happens. So there's some sense of openness and acceptance baked into the notion of patience in this particular definition in the Buddhist tradition. Patience to how things may unfold, as opposed to getting lost in all the stories that we tell ourselves about how things ought to unfold. Hopefully that's clear. Gosh darn puppies are eating my peanuts. So eating is exertion. This is where I wanted to leap into a moment ago, that we would exert ourselves on behalf of others. When I talked about laziness a moment ago, I was referring to the sense of like, it's hard for us to always open and manifest this awake heart. Sometimes we just want to curl up in bed and watch Netflix. But it's this idea of like, well, if we're in the water, why would we be lazy? If we get lazy, we're just going to get pushed back to that other shore, to that first shore of discomfort. So we've got to exert ourselves to go toward enlightenment. And part of that is exerting ourselves in compassionate activity to others. And as I mentioned before, it's not like, okay, so here's the 5 versions of ways, if you do X, Y, and Z, then you become enlightened because you've exerted yourself in those 5 ways. That's not it. It's continuously offering an open heart. That's how we exert ourselves. Continuously offering our open heart to the person that we find difficult, to that person who's waiting in line, to our family member who's struggling, but they're always struggling. There's some sense of like even noticing when we start to get fatigued or lazy and saying, I don't need to do that. I don't need to buy into, well, they're always like this. Letting go of those stories, exerting ourselves. How can I show up for this person more fully? My and peanuts. My is meditative concentration. So much of this comes from the ability to just be present with people as they are. The more we engage in our meditation practice, particularly the mindfulness of the breath, shamatha, calm abiding meditation, the more we are able to show up more fully for those around us. Much of the compassionate activity flows from simply being present enough to understand what's going on in this moment, through concentrating on being here long enough to understand what's going on, which brings us right into the last one, peanuts, which is prajna. Pra is this word that can be translated super or superior. Jna would be knowing or knowledge. Superior knowledge, or the way that's often translated is wisdom. This is not wisdom that we need to develop because we've read a lot of books. It's not book wisdom. It's not street wisdom, like street smarts. It's the fact that we possess innate wisdom. The wisdom to be with things as they are and to understand them clearly. This is when we talk about Buddha nature and the Buddha waking up and becoming enlightened and going to that other shore, is because he was able to be with reality as it is. And that's prajna. That's wisdom. The ability to just be with things as they are. I wrote in The Buddha Walks into a Bar, my first book, a classic story that is still my go-to decades later. That there was a time when I was 18, I was living at a meditation center in Vermont, and there were a couple hundred people on the land. And I was working there, and I knew that there was a lot of tension between the head of the garden and the head of the kitchen. And the head of the garden, apparently, grabbed a box of tomatoes, ran into the kitchen, because he was in a rush. They were feeding several hundred people with just these very limited resources. And he did something that I guess, I've never worked in a kitchen like this, but it's supposedly a very big no-no. He placed the box of tomatoes right in the middle of someone's cooking station, sort of screwing up the flow of how everything was happening. He didn't know that, of course, but he just put the box down somewhere. He turned and he started going back to the garden because he was in a hurry. The head of the kitchen saw that and in a fury grabbed the box, went out to that back porch, and threw them. They went everywhere. The head of the garden turned around. They locked eyes for what felt like an eternity, was probably just for 30 seconds or so. And then the head of the kitchen turned around, slammed the door behind him. The head of the garden turned around, stormed off to the garden. And in that moment, everyone and their mom had an idea of what needed to happen. We got to put them in mediation. The head of the kitchen's such a hothead, he's got to get fired. No, the head of the garden should be let go. He's newer. Everyone had an idea of how do you solve the thing. But there's one person who was on retreat at that time. And she was in silence. She was a young lady. And she quietly got up and put the box right side up and went around and started picking up the tomatoes one by one and putting them back in the box. And when she was done, she took that box and she put it on the back porch until people could calm down and see the situation with a cooler head. In that moment, that's all that needed to happen. The tomatoes needed to be picked up. It was actually the most skillful thing I could possibly see. This person wasn't lost in their stories about what about this, what about that. She just saw that tomatoes needed to be picked up. Because she was present enough to be there for the situation and not so lost in me and my ideas of what I think ought to happen. So there's a sense of removing the meanness, the sense of like, here's what I need, here's what I want to happen, and just being open to things as they are. That's prajna, that's wisdom. And from that place, that makes all of these other qualities, generosity, discipline, patience, exertion, and meditative concentration, that makes them transcendental. But otherwise, they're just actions. Me handing something from my right hand to my left is fine. But when I'm actually present with reality as it is, to the best of my ability, then all of a sudden everything is infused with wisdom. Then it's not, I'm helping this person out by giving them $1. This homeless person's gonna go spend it, whatever, that's cool. It's a sense of, I'm just open and here's someone that needs my help and I am just there. And there's a sense of true presence, connection to reality, and as a result, our open and awake heart flows more smoothly so that the action that comes out of it, whether it's generosity or patience or whatever, is genuine to the moment. It's genuine to what needs to happen, as opposed to being so lost in my idea of what ought to happen. So these are the 6. Generosity, patience, discipline, exertion, meditative concentration, prajna or wisdom. And these are the things that help us move out of not just thinking about me and my thing, but into genuinely being with reality as it is. And what is being with genuine reality? It's enlightenment. It's actually us waking up. It's us moving beyond the stressors of the day and into something a little bit larger, a little bit something more vast. And it stems from the aspirations that we could actually be of service, not just to ourselves, but to others as well. So thank you for taking this giant journey with me, and I look forward to us discussing these things again very soon.